In this chapter, we're going to have another sweet project. We're going to take an Illustrator file, matter of fact, this one right here, and we're actually going to import this. And actually, I've broken up this Illustrator file into a series of layers, and we're going to animate the different components. Now, if you're not very familiar with Adobe Illustrator, no big deal. I'll be explaining Adobe Illustrator, what it does, and why you want to use it as an After Effects user later on in this training series. But for now, it's good to know that this is the image that we're going to be importing. It's a flat, dead image. Illustrator is not like an animation tool. This is just basically flat art. And what I wanted to show you here in this movie is how to import Adobe Illustrator files. When we import layered files from Photoshop or Illustrator, we do so in kind of a different way than we import regular files. Let me show you what I mean here. Let's do this together. In the project panel, I'm going to double click here somewhere, anywhere in this gray area here, to open up the import file dialog box. And next I'm going to go to the graphics folder inside the media folder of the exercise files. And I'm going to choose the Explore California Logo Layered.ai file. Now, if this were a movie file or a still image or an audio file, we would just click open and that's it. But when we have a layered Illustrator file or a layered Photoshop file, we have additional options and choices. Now, we can import this as footage or as a composition. Now, the composition is actually what we're going to eventually import this as, but for now, let me just briefly explain what this is. If you import as a composition, then all of the layers from the original file will be brought into After Effects, stored nicely in a little folder. And also, After Effects will create a composition for you that has all of the layers of the Illustrator or Photoshop document as layers in the After Effects composition it creates for you. And again, we're going to see that in just a moment. If you choose footage and click open, this will allow you to merge layers. What this will do is it will take all of these layers and smush them together into one file, or in other words, like one layer. So if you didn't want to actually break up pieces of this and animate different components of this file, then you could merge the layers and it could just be one file. So let's say you had a background file or something like that that you made in Photoshop, some cool texture or pattern, and you just wanted to merge all those layers, then you could just choose merge layers as long as it's set to footage here. You could also choose an individual layer. Going back to Illustrator, this sun image here, the sun graphic, is on its own layer. So what we could do is go back to After Effects and from this dropdown choose sun. If we only wanted to bring in the sun from the Illustrator file, then that's where we would choose it. This is really good. Let's say you do a lot of work for a client and maybe they've given you files in the past that like their logo is in, and you might not want to import the entire document. You just want to import their logo layer. This is a good way to do that. So these are the choices. You could either merge the layers or choose a specific layer if you're going to import as footage, but we actually want to import this as a composition. And we have two choices, layer size or document size. This will make more sense later on, but basically this refers to where the anchor point is, which again will probably not make too much sense until we get later on in this chapter. So for now, I'm going to choose layer size and click OK. And here is what has happened here. Here we have all of the layers from the Illustrator file. If I resize the project panel by clicking on this vertical divider bar and moving to the right, we could expand this a little bit and see the names of these layers. So it gives us the name of the layer and then a slash and then the name of the document that this layer is found in. It puts them in order and it names them for us all nicely stored in this folder. And you can see even here the sun layer. And as I click on it, as with most objects in the project panel, you get a thumbnail here at the top that gives you an idea of what's on that exact layer. If this were a movie file or an image, we'd also have a preview here. And as mentioned, it did create a composition for us. So if we want to open this composition up, all we have to do is just double click it. And we'll see that all of the layers from the Illustrator file have come here into After Effects. And we could take off the visibility. Let's say, for example, the biker body layer. We can take off the visibility of this layer. We can see that that's a separate component that we can then animate and play with. So that is what we're going to do in this chapter. We're going to take the various components of this Illustrator file and animate them here in After Effects, which is actually a very common use for After Effects, to take a layered Photoshop or Illustrator file and then play with it here. So now that we got the Illustrator file import out of the way, let's talk about the basics of animation. So now we are continuing on with this logo from Illustrator. I've done a few little color embellishments here. I'll teach you how to do that later on in this training series. But now we finally get to this place where the rubber meets the road and talk about animation, how to bring things to life in After Effects. Again, the great joy of After Effects is that when you learn how to animate anything, any one property in After Effects, everything animates the same exact way. And as you go through this training series, you'll see that, and it will bring you joy. So let's go to this Explore layer. Go ahead and come over to the left side of the name Explore and click this right-facing arrow to expand this layer and see its contents. Every layer has this transform area. So click the arrow next to transform to expand it, and you'll see 5 different values. And again, this is the same case on every layer. It's not just this Explore layer. It's every layer in After Effects has these same 5 properties. These are the key elements of animation in After Effects, and we'll be talking about these throughout this chapter. Now, just so we don't get confused here, I'm going to select the Explore layer, so it's highlighted. You can see these layers are not highlighted, and this one is. Go ahead and press the letter R on your keyboard to reveal the rotation property only. So we have just rotation, the stopwatch next to rotation, and then its value. Initially, this may look confusing because we have 0x plus 0.0 degrees. That may look a little off-putting at first, but we'll talk about rotation specifically later on in this chapter, and you'll see it's not super confusing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the right value of the 2 different zeros and just click and drag to the right. And you'll see that as we go left, it rotates counterclockwise. As we go right, it rotates clockwise. And then, let's say we'll twist it a little bit and then grab our current time indicator and move around in time. You can see that it just stays there. It doesn't change in value. So if you change a property in After Effects, After Effects will assume by default that that is the way that you want things to be. But see, when you animate something, you want it to change value over time. The way that we do that is with the stopwatch. And really, animation is a 3-step process. I'm going to go ahead and click this value, and when we click that value once, we'll get a field where we can manually type in a value. So I'm going to type in 0 and press enter. So the 3 steps to animate are, first, click the stopwatch. That tells After Effects we want this property to change over time. That action also tells After Effects to remember the current value at this particular time. And so it creates this little diamond here in the timeline that's kind of like a marker, an indicator that at this particular place in time, at 3 seconds and 13 frames in this case, it will be at this value, at 0, 0. So all we've done so far is to click the stopwatch. Step 2 is to move in time. Step 3 is to change the value. And again, a little diamond has been created for us, and that's After Effects' way of telling us that it remembers this value, 36 degrees, at this time, at 7 seconds and 6 frames. Now, folks, this is the magic of After Effects. That's all you have to do. If we scrub our current time indicator, we can see that the value automatically changes to go from point A to point B, and that's all we had to do. We didn't have to tell it, okay, After Effects, those are the 2 values we want. Now you go animate. It automatically did that for us. Now, one word of caution. If I hit Command Z or Control Z on the PC, that will undo my last action. And that is how you undo a keyframe. You could also select it and then hit the delete key. I'll actually redo that. Edit, redo value change. And I could select it and then I'll hit delete. When they are not selected, they are gray. And those are the 2 methods that are okay for deleting keyframes. If you were to click the stopwatch again, basically deselecting the stopwatch, that would erase all keyframes for that property. And whatever the current value is, that will be the permanent value then. So be very careful with that. And a lot of students that I've taught, that's like their first inclination when they're playing around with the value or with animation at first. They want to click the stopwatch again when they want to undo something, but that will wipe the slate entirely clean. Sometimes you might want that, but be aware that that's what you're doing when you deselect the stopwatch. Now we're going to go through a series of these, actually all of these transforms. If I close that later, open it again, and see all these different transforms. It works the same exact way with position, with scale, opacity. It's the same exact thing. I click the stopwatch, let's say for example opacity, which refers to the transparency of the object. At 100% it's completely opaque and not transparent. So I click the stopwatch, move in time, and change the value. Click and drag this to the left to fade that out a little bit. And it fades out automatically. Now that's pretty much the end of the tutorial. We're going to be practicing with these 5 properties throughout this chapter. So if that's all you need, you can just close this movie. I wanted to give you some artistic background for those of you that are interested in kind of going the extra mile as far as your knowledge is concerned. But this comes back from an original Disney concept for animation. What they would do, and actually what's still done on shows like The Simpsons and whatnot that are hand-drawn animation, what they will do is they'll have the high-paid animators create the important frames of animation. And then they will send the work off to maybe overseas or somewhere where people are making less money and the labor is cheaper, or maybe to a junior animator, and they make the frames in between the key, or in other words, the important frames. Well, After Effects uses this analogy as well, and that is what we are doing. You and I, as users of After Effects, we are the keyframe creators. We say, okay, After Effects, I want you here at this point and there at that point. And then After Effects is kind of like our grunt servant animator that goes in and creates all the frames in between. Now, if you're brand new to After Effects, this concept may seem a little unusual, but trust me, by the end of this chapter even, you will be feeling so solid and secure in this information that it will no longer seem like some weird theory. And it's just amazing. Again, a few chapters down the road, we're going to get into effects, and you'll see that we animate effects in the same way. If you're going to make a lightning bolt, you animate it in the exact same way with this whole stopwatch deal. So it all works the same. You learn this one concept of After Effects. It's almost like you're now familiar with the entire program at once. So phenomenal. Love it. So let's back up a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about animating opacity specifically in the next movie.